As I was pulling together resources for my Incubus video, I had a small problem that I was trying to solve. My copy of Incubus does not have great audio, and I was hoping to find a clear example of the music for you. After scrubbing through a few different versions of the film, I came to the conclusion that better versions of the music have long been lost to history. Every copy of the audio that is available to us is muddled, grainy, and unclear. I was on the verge of giving up my quest, but then I discovered a most interesting video on YouTube. Let me play you a sample of the Incubus score as you would hear it in just about any copy of the movie out there. Now here is an example of the YouTube video. Yeah, wicked different. I immediately wanted to know where this Jason K guy found this version of the score. I imagined he had found perfect tapes of the score in a secret vault somewhere, or that he had somehow discovered a pristine copy of Incubus and was keeping it for himself. My investigative wheels started turning. I wanted to know who this guy was and how he ended up with such a clean version of the Incubus track. So I reached out.
Hey there.
Hey, what's up, Jason? How's it going, sir?
Hey. Good, it's good. Let me see. Hold on, I've only got audio in one ear here.
You're like in heaven. I can't see
There
you.
we
I
go,
just see
there
a
we go.
mist.
All right, it's my very paranoid piece of blue tape over my camera.
This is Jason Kruppa, the mysterious entity behind the aforementioned YouTube video. Jason is a photographer, a music historian, and he co-wrote a book on the Beatles titled All Things Must Pass Away, Harrison, Clapton, and Other Assorted Love Songs. But more importantly for this video, he has a podcast called Producing the Beatles, the podcast. It is a narrative-based exploration of the Beatles from the perspective of the Beatles producer, George Martin. Jason does something really cool with this podcast. He combines his knowledge of studio production with his research into George Martin, and he actually reconstructs the Beatles tracks as a means of education. He's like a mechanic who takes an engine apart and puts it back together in order to show you how each part works. One of Jason's hobbies is score reconstruction. He started with the original Blade Runner soundtrack, which had never been officially released in its entirety. Using an online network of audio files and score sleuths, he was able to build out the hard-to-get tracks from Blade Runner, and they sound glorious. His second major score reconstruction project was a little more difficult, and that leads us back to Incubus. How did you get exposed to the Incubus soundtrack in the first place?
Watching the film, which I'd heard about for years, and finally decided to sit down and watch it. And in the course of that, realizing, what's this strange soundtrack? And I'd seen all the old Outer Limits episodes years ago, and sort of rang a faint bell. And I started digging, and I was realized that all the music had been tracked in from Outer Limits, and nobody really knew what pieces were.
If you watched my previous video, you already know that the Incubus score was mostly comprised of music cues from the Outer Limits. This was a cost-saving method for Leslie Stevens' production company Daystar, which already owned the Outer Limits cues. With Dominic Frontieri's oversight, music editor John Caper Jr. remixed a bunch of different Outer Limits cues together into a new score. The resulting score is both enchanting and unsettling, and to me, it is one of the highlights of the film. Up until this point, no one has ever attempted to figure out which pieces of the Outer Limits music were used in Incubus. No one has ever attempted to untangle the web that John Caper Jr. had woven. That is, no one before Jason Kruppa. Jason's reconstruction project requires him to listen to the Incubus score ad nauseum. He then goes to the episodes of the Outer Limits in order to find the sampled cues. Once he has identified those cues, he then puts them together in a digital audio workstation. The longest part of the process is finding the cues, which can be exhaustive. At times, the sampled cues are obvious because of how much of the cue was used in Incubus. This is the case for the sample taken from the Outer Limits episode, The Mice. Other times, however, the sampled music can be much more difficult to find because only a small piece of the cue is used. And sometimes one cue can sound like another cue, and then the puzzle pieces don't fit together exactly right. He has to do some serious detective work in order to get the results to be as close as possible. Once he puts all the pieces together, he adds the necessary reverb and crossfades, and then he has a completed Incubus track. Well, before we move on, I want to make it exceptionally clear to the audience, because when I first, sort of jumped into this with you and we started talking about this, I had presumed that there was some sort of like magic thing you were doing for this reconstruction. I presumed that you had like dug up this archive of music that you've been, kind of fitting it together using some sort of algorithm or something. I didn't realize until we started talking that what you're doing, again, the word forensics is super helpful here. Like, you're just listening to it, you're recreating the sounds, or you're finding the sounds inside of the Outer Limits episodes. And you're just smashing it all together.
If you've listened to the music, and hopefully people who are listening to this maybe have some familiarity with it, to be able to listen and hear something that's maybe 30 seconds long and say, okay, where did this come from? And then go to an episode which may have 10, 15 minutes of music in it, and find that little piece of composition it's ridiculous. No sane person would do this.
Despite the challenge of this project, or more accurately, because of the challenge of this project, reconstructing the Incubus score has become a puzzle that Jason just can't put down. As of the time of our last conversation, Jason has completed 70% of the entire soundtrack for Incubus, which is insane, especially when you remember that this is only a personal project. Jason is not getting paid for all of his hours of tedium and frustration. And as he himself would admit, there's not likely going to be a bunch of people flocking to the release of the reconstructed Incubus score.
I can't imagine, there are more than like 10 people who care about Incubus, like the music and how it was put together.
Yeah. And you and I are two of them. So there's like 8 other people somewhere. Yeah.
8 other people somewhere in the world.
One of the things that I've heard over and over from seasoned veterans who work in creative industries like I do is that there is a ton of value in producing personal projects for yourself. This is true whether you do photography or filmmaking or writing or anything. And I think this is especially true when the value you find in the personal project has nothing to do with financial compensation. In Jason's case, he treats these reconstructions as a method of educating himself. Similar to how he teaches listeners on his podcast how the Beatles' music was produced by breaking down the track, he is teaching himself how John Caper Jr. remixed the Outer Limits music by following in Caper's footsteps. By recreating the works of other composers and music editors, Jason is able to figure out how the mechanics of their compositions work. In doing so, he's able to compose music that closely emulates their unique style. This personal project has been a mental exercise that has helped him grow as a composer and editor. Despite the fact that this reconstruction project is frustrating, hard, and unpaid, it is one that Jason believes is valuable. He continues forward without any expectation of recognition or compensation. He does it to learn, and he does it for the joy of doing it. And I think that is a beautiful thing. Hello, friend. Thank you for tuning in. I am experimenting with a new format for this particular video, and I have to say I'm pretty pleased with how this one turned out. I'm going to be releasing my conversation with Jason Kruppa tomorrow, so if you're interested in learning more about Jason and hearing him go into detail about John Caper Jr. and Dominic Frontieri, tune back in for the deep dive. I want to give a special thank you to Jason Kruppa, who is just such a cool guy. I couldn't have asked for a better first guest to interview for this channel. He's incredibly knowledgeable and humble and helpful, and I just love talking to him. Jason, seriously, let's talk again soon. I would highly recommend you check out Jason Kruppa's podcast, Producing the Beatles, the podcast. If you would like to hear the score reconstructions that he has released so far, you can check out his channel, the link to which is in the description below. Definitely go check it out. What he does is incredible. Lastly, I want to thank my subscribers. You are the few, the proud, and I appreciate your moral support. Pressing that little virtual button may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to me, and I just want to tell you that I appreciate it. So, until next time, peace.